Are you looking for the best beer and cigarette prices in Bradley County? Well, look no further than Tom's Fuel Mart. That's right, look for the red and yellow signs. 25 feet from the street, 4 locations in Cleveland to serve you. At Tom's Fuel Mart number 4, that's right there near the Cleveland Speedway. You get the best homemade biscuits, sandwiches, and that includes the best fried bologna sandwiches in town. Just ask the Matador. That's right, Tom's Fuel and Mart, where you can find 100% gasoline. That means no ethanol, folks, for your lawnmowers and small engines. Do it. With locations on South Lee Highway, Wildwood, and North Ocoee, Tom's Fuel Mart, with the red and yellow sign 25 feet from the street, is ready to serve you. Yeehaw!
And check out Tom's new Orbit Express I-75 Paul Huff Parkway.
Okay, and we're back. We're joined now by Tim Gobble. He's a former Secret Service agent, and it's a timely topic because the Secret Service hadn't been so secret lately. So, Tim, you've been so many different things in public service. I'll let you introduce you the way you would just introduce yourself.
Thank you, David. It's good to be with you folks down here at Whoop today. As you mentioned, I began my public service career back in 1988 as a police officer with the Cleveland, Tennessee Police Department. Shortly after that, I was hired by the Secret Service, became a special agent with the Secret Service, assigned to different locations throughout the United States, and traveled pretty much all over the world during the next 15 years with them. Enjoyed it very much, but had a desire to come back to my hometown. And
that would have taken you up to what year?
That was 2004. 2004 is when I left Secret Service, April of 2004. And then my desire was to pursue a developing interest in elected public office. So I came back, and with the intent of running for sheriff and then possibly later United States Congress. But Zach Wamp was in the position there, and it was, as you know, it's always difficult to beat an incumbent congressman.
Well, you weren't going to blow Zach out of that.
No, but I wanted to get into public service in some way, elected office. I had also served as a member of the Cleveland City Council for a period of time, and that was a nonpartisan position. And then ran for sheriff and won the sheriff's race by a large margin, and was serving that term. And my intent was really to serve there for several terms until maybe the congressional seat came open. And to my surprise, Zach Wamp decided to run for governor and vacate the congressional seat. So I jumped in that race early on, as I was concluding my first term as sheriff, and ran for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District. Now, I won Bradley County by a large margin, and I'm grateful to the voters of Bradley County for their support in all my elections. Never lost a race in Bradley County, but I did lose the congressional race. I came in 3rd overall with 12 candidates in the race. Chuck Fleischman went on to win it. And Chuck and I are friends, and he's served well in that position. And now I'm actually been drawn into the 4th district with the redistricting. I'll actually, same house, but I live now in the 4th district instead of the 3rd congressional district. So I don't know that I'll run again, but I wouldn't rule it out at some point maybe in the future. But that's kind of what brought me to this position. I currently now serve on the parole board. And then after I ran for Congress, I was appointed city manager in East Ridge, and now I'm serving on the parole board.
Okay, so back to the Secret Service. You served in it while it was in the Department of Treasury, and then you also served in it after it was transferred to Homeland Security.
That's correct. I've served in both, under both capacities. I started like in 1989, and then ended my service 15 years later there in 2004.
Well, exactly what is the mission of the Secret Service, and did it change or anything after it was transferred to another agency?
The Secret Service was created in 1865 by President Lincoln. It was actually by coincidence on the day that he went to Ford's Theater and was shot and killed. He had signed a bill creating and authorizing the creation of the United States Secret Service for the sole purpose of investigating and suppressing counterfeit money. After the Civil War, there was about 1/3 to 1/2 of all currency in circulation at that time was counterfeit. And you can imagine what that was doing to the national economy and the problems that we were facing with that in a fledgling nation just coming out of the Civil War. And so there was a need for a federal agency to investigate and suppress this, and that's how it ended up under the Department of Treasury. And over the years, because it was one of the first federal law enforcement agencies created that had nationwide jurisdiction, it began to take on additional duties of the federal government that needed to be done, additional financial crime investigations. But it wasn't until 1901 that the Secret Service became the top protective agency in the nation and really the world when they began protecting Theodore Roosevelt because there was a series of assassinations of presidents. I believe it was an attempt Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley. Those 3 assassinations before the Secret Service ever took over, and they felt there was a need for presidential protection. And from 1901 forward, with Teddy Roosevelt, which incidentally is one of my favorite presidents, looking back over history, forward, the Secret Service has been protecting presidents from that time forward, and that's what it's most known for today is protection, but it's always had a dual role of investigations and protective mission, investigative financial crimes with dual jurisdiction with the FBI and a lot of other things. And I did that as well.
Well, before it was an agency. I mean, it was a law enforcement agency within a relatively small department. I mean, the Treasury Department,
yes,
with the Coast Guard, and now it's a relatively small part of the Homeland Security Department. Has that had anything to do with the scandals that we've seen, or in the last few years, or what?
That occurred after 9/11, and under the Bush administration, they revamped intelligence and national security areas, and a number of things were. After the Department of Homeland Security was created, the Secret Service was moved from Treasury under the Department of Homeland Security, which is a big, large agency compared to what the Treasury Department was. And there's been some criticism about the Secret Service losing some of its individual ability to do things under the Department of Homeland Security that other than what it had under the Department of Treasury. I don't know if that's a justified criticism or not, but we have seen in the past few years some breaches in security that currently would certainly cause concern, and I think rightly so they are being addressed at this time. And I know the Secret Service is a very good, very elite, very highly trained group of individuals. It sounds like to me there may be some leadership problems there that needed to be addressed, and it looks like that is underway at this time.
Do you know the interim director?
I do not. I have not, to my knowledge, had the opportunity to meet him prior. I did know the director that just resigned as well as the previous directors, but this one I just had not had the opportunity. Secret Service has about 5,000 at the time that I left, had about 5,000 total employees, about 2,500 special agents, of which I was a part of those ranks. And so it's a relatively small agency. Most of us had either worked with each other at some point or been acquainted with each other. But now it's even larger than that under the Department of Homeland Security and different things. So sometimes you know other agents and sometimes you don't. And if you hadn't had the opportunity to work with him, I just don't recall it. I may have met him somewhere along the way, but I don't recall it.
Do you think it was as things go forward and it seems like this situation has deteriorated with the Secret Service? I also have a friend of our family, a friend of my father's that is a retired Secret Service. And do you think it was a mistake to move them out of Treasury and into the Homeland Security, which Homeland Security seems to be constantly inundated with all types of breaches and problems? And it seems like once they did that, now you've lost a little bit of that cohesiveness, that team atmosphere that the Secret Service used to have that they don't have now, because now they're part of this bigger mass. And as you said, they don't seem to know each other. And if I was in that situation, I would want to have a teammate that I knew. I'm working as a personal security for the president. I want to know what you're doing, what she's doing, what everybody's doing. Then as you bring in people that have never had that mindset that are now directing you, it seems to me that would be, a situation ripe for a decline in the morale of the agents, because all of a sudden you got somebody giving you directions that's never been in your position, knows nothing about what you do actually, and I just wonder if you think that was a mistake.
Well, I probably don't know enough about the transfer to know for whether or not it was a mistake or not. I think you have seen some indications in recent years that would indicate it might have been, based on just some of the things you've commented, the breaches of security, and lack of cohesiveness among some of the agents maybe. But I go back to the people that I worked with, the individual agents that we did work as a team.
Right.
We were dedicated. It was an elite group of people dedicated to serving the nation, protecting the president, and the people themselves that do the job are very impressive people and do a fantastic job. And I think the question is, do they have the best leadership? And are they at the best place under the Department of Homeland Security? Could they be a different place that would guarantee or help guarantee the safety of the president and those that the Secret Service protects, which is not just the president, there are a whole host of other folks that the Secret Service protects, foreign leaders as they visit the United States. And I've been on a number of those high-level details, Mikhail Gorbachev, Israeli prime ministers and others that have come in, the Mubarak of Egypt and others that are high-level, high terrorist targets. And the Secret Service protects the number one terrorist target in the world, the president and the vice president, as well as the White House and other facilities that would be terrorist targets. So they're very good, and they do a good job.
And they've still done a good job. I mean, because President Obama's had more threats, and I don't know how many of them are credible, but he's had more threats than any president ever.
That is my understanding. He receives, all presidents receive threats every day, and the Secret Service investigates every one of them, takes them all seriously. But my understanding from the contacts that I still have in the ranks of the Secret Service, and a lot of my vintage are starting to retire now, but they indicate to me that there is a significant increase in threats that are made against President Obama than previous presidents.
Well, you mentioned protecting foreign dignitaries. What were some of your other responsibilities?
Financial crimes investigations, counterfeiting investigations, and then the protection side. It's about, over the course of the career, because of the need to be on when you're on a protection detail, you've got to really be alert and on top of your game, and you can't make mistakes, because mistakes can result in the death of individuals or people in attendance at major national security events and things like that. So there's not room for error, as we've seen. And then when something does happen, it's national news. A guy jumping across the White House lawn and running into the door of the White House is a major breach of security. It should have been stopped before it ever happened, and there's clearly mistakes were made. So they've got to identify and look where those mistakes, what fell through, what the problems were, and work to correct it. So you can't really afford to make mistakes in protection. Investigative-wise, I think investigations make good protective agents. When you understand and know the criminal mindset, and you study and learn terrorism and threats against the president and all those things, it makes you a better protective agent, because you know what to look for, and you know what to be suspicious of, and you know how the criminal mind works in a lot of ways. And so the dual mission has actually been good for the Secret Service over its course.
Are financial crimes still under the auspices of Secret Service since it moved out of Treasury?
A number of them are.
They?
They are counterfeiting, credit card fraud, access device fraud. Like, for instance, and you can look it up on some of these websites, a major case which involved the counterfeiting of U.S. Treasury notes that I investigated when I was in Houston, Texas. Some of that, it made national news, and because of the size of it, and the Secret Service was involved in that, and so that was one of my cases, and just you can see some of the case law that resulted from that when I was in Houston. So it's a variety of things, and it's been good. Do I miss the Secret Service? In some ways I do, in some ways I don't. It's kind of a young man's game, to be honest with you. And with the travel and being gone and all over the world and living out of a suitcase, you do miss a lot of family time and family. And I was at the point where I was kind of my children were getting older and involved in sports and different things, and I felt like it was time to spend a little bit more time at home. And also I had that developing interest in running for elective office, and where better to do that than where you're from and where you grew up. And that's I'd worked my way back here and didn't want to leave.
Okay, well, I just wondering, Clint Eastwood, he was he took a bullet for the president.
Because that
in
was
the
real.
line of fire.
Yeah.
Hollywood.
That was a great Hollywood movie. I'll say that. Yeah.
David, Hollywood.
Clint, was it Hulligan, or was his name Horgan or Hulligan?
Houlihan was it? No, Houlihan was his assistant or something.
Yeah, something like that. But there were actually Secret Service agents that consulted on that movie for technical reality, but it's a Hollywood movie, of course, and but all the weapons and things that you see in the movie are accurate. Secret Service carries and uses.
So, but would you have taken a bullet?
Oh, sure. I mean, all Secret Service agents would, and I think that's part of why people admire people that are in the ranks of the Secret Service. It doesn't matter who you protect; you are sworn to give your life in exchange for protecting another if it's necessary. Now, you certainly want to make every effort to avoid that, and if it comes down to that, there's usually a problem that's developed somewhere that should have been picked up on beforehand.
And that's where the trust in the small agency, that's where the trust comes from.
That's exactly
right.
Dan's right. I mean, you don't want to have the back of your partner, and your partner wants to have the back of you. And it's when we say partner, it's a group of people.
Right.
I mean, anytime the president moves outside the White House, the entire White House apparatus moves with him and the vice president. And at any moment, the vice president can become president. So you've got two protective bubbles with all the assets that they have to have in order to function as the commander-in-chief of our armed forces and other things, and to make those type of decisions moving wherever they go. And it is a major undertaking, a major undertaking. And on 9/11, President Bush, before they knew the extent of the attack, and they were making the tactical decisions to land all the aircraft nationwide, they didn't know how extensive it was going to be. President Bush left the elementary school where, the famous pictures of him being told what was going on, and then boarded Air Force One, and then basically hopscotched across the country. Initially, they were going to come back to Washington, but then realizing that Washington itself was under attack, they implemented the basically continuity of operations system, COOP plan for the United States government. A lot of it's top secret information, but part of that is that the president stays on the move, airborne, or there's a series of secure locations around the country that he can go to. But what people need to remember is wherever the president is, he is capable of doing his job and responding to any attack that the United States might be under, from nuclear on down. So whether he's in the Air Force One or the Airborne Command Center or anywhere he's at, he is still the President of the United States, still in charge, has all the assets that he needs. The Secret Service participates in that, as well as the United States military. And even when he's on the golf course, you won't hear me criticize the president for being on the golf course or at Martha's Vineyard on vacation. They still act and have the capacity of act. to act as commander-in-chief, and everything that they need is there with them to do their job, and they're never really on vacation. So it's really unfair to criticize them that, and that's a lot of politics, but they're still doing their job.
Well, don't you think, too, that actually someone on the move like that is actually a much more difficult target? I would think, if you're sitting in the White House and if you're going to attack a country, okay, so you got Congress, the Senate, the President, the Pentagon, all in this small area. Okay, so what if you have the capability of a massive attack? Where are you going? I'm going right here.
Right.
The guy's on the move. You don't really. I mean, I don't know what they use, if they use a decoy system, if anybody, any of that stuff. But it seems to me that that's an effective. That's a very effective strategy to use. Because it makes it more difficult.
You're absolutely right, Dan. And if you think back at when our top national leadership might be most vulnerable, and it happens every year at the State of the Union message, where you have the entire government, the top leaders of the executive branch, the legislative branch, as well as the Supreme Court, all in that one room at the Capitol in the House chambers for the State of the Union message, the President, the Vice President, Speaker of the House. But what happens of course, that is a very secure facility. There's all kinds of government assets to secure that facility during that time, and a major lead up to that. But also the president designates one person in the line of succession, and that's all detailed out. And that person is taken away to a undisclosed secret location somewhere. Secret Service has them under protection, as well as the military and the assets necessary to respond to nuclear attack or anything, weapons of mass destruction that might be used against Washington at that time. That this person, in the unlikely event, but real event, that all the top leaders of the government are wiped out during that State of the Union message, this person can respond and lead the nation from that point forward in a response, and the government can continue to operate and function.
You mean somebody other than the Vice President, Speaker
Yes, because
of the House?
Correct, because the Vice President and the Speaker of the House, and then there's a whole list, and it's all in law and statute as to the who is next in line of succession, and it's generally some cabinet member somewhere down the way. It might be the Secretary of Health and Human Development or HUD, whatever. I think I said that wrong.
It's not Alexander Haig.
If he's in the line of succession at the time, I think is Alexander Haig still living? I think he passed away, didn't he?
We hope it's not him.
Yeah.
But it could be somebody, and the president designates it, and nobody knows. It's not made public or where or anything like that, but that's how it works. And we've got really the greatest system in the world as far as having a peaceful transition of power. You won't see coups and the overthrow of our elected representatives in this country, I don't think, like you see in other countries.
Yeah. How much communication was there between the Secret Service and the KGB when Khrushchev?
Like when Gorbachev came in, I worked with the KGB in that, and through those visits, and it was a close working relationship, but you don't completely trust one another because it was at the height of the Cold War at different times, or the end of it, and CIA and other people brief the Secret Service on things that we need to know for those particular events, and you just keep a close eye out. And you also, they will act like, a lot of times when they were here, they would act like they didn't speak English or understand English, but you can bet they do, and they are listening, so be careful what you say in earshot of them or even other places. And there's a whole technical aspect of this too, because there's a big cat and mouse spy game that goes on all the time between countries, and they are attempting to learn intelligence from you. You may be attempting to learn intelligence from them. So you've got to be careful about the planning of technical listening devices and things like that. And there's always sweeping locations for those type of devices and jamming signals and things to try to prevent that from happening. If you'll notice in the president's motorcade, there's cars with a lot of antennas on them, and some of it's classified and some of it's not, but there's reasons for those, and some of that has to do with making sure the president's communications are safe.
Loose lips sink ships.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's interesting. It was a great experience, and I'm glad that I had it. And I think the Secret Service is going to continue to do well. I don't feel like that the nation or the president is in extreme danger, other than the president is always in danger just because of the nature of the job that he's in and being the top terrorist target. You can but there are a lot of things that are done to minimize the risk, but you'll never take the risk completely away.
So, was there ever a shoot to kill mandate when someone crossed the fence? Or
well, I mean, I think that they could have clearly in this case would have been justified in using lethal force when somebody comes across the fence and continues to move toward the White House without stopping, and then makes an effort to enter the White House. Now,
with a backpack on.
Correct. You don't
You know, I mean,
you
that's
don't
even more
know
alarming.
what is in that. It
Yeah,
could be any type of
yes.
explosive. It could be a chemical, biological agent. It could be a whole host of things, or he could have guns under his shirt or things like that. Now, I don't know that you should just open fire on somebody immediately when they jump the fence, but there's mechanisms in place or people in place to respond to that. There was a breakdown somewhere, but clearly as this person, Omar Gonzalez, continued to move toward the White House and enter the White House, I think lethal force would have been justified at some point under the fact that clearly he's not a friend.
Right.
He's not there to sell Girl Scout cookies. But you do encounter a lot of mentally ill people and other things that you try to balance those as best you can. And I'm sure a full investigation will determine where the problem breakdown was.
Okay. Well, we've been talking to former Secret Service agent Tim Gobble and about the recent Secret Service lapses and the Secret Service in general. Appreciate your time, Tim. We've got to move on and talk to our next guest. She's Dr. Karen Mundy, and she's going to talk to us about the Ebola virus and epidemiology.
Another national security threat.
Yes.
No doubt about that.
Yes,
And thank you, David.
You can stay if you want to.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm going to head on back to the office. I got some things I need to do, but I'll
Need
listen
to-
on the radio.
need to-
And
probate somebody.
yeah. Well, there's a procedure in place for all that too. We generally don't discuss any cases as kind of like a judge individual cases, but we can always talk about procedure someday. And
Sure.
I appreciate you having me by, and good to see everybody. And y'all continue to do great things here on the Whoop.
Okay. Thanks, Tim.
Good seeing
Thank
Tim.
you.
There.
Want to take a break? Want to take a break, Dave?
Yeah, let's
And we'll transition to the doctor.
Yeah.
Wheeler Technologies has moved. Visit them at their new location at 490 Grove Avenue Southwest next to Bradley Rentals. Same great folks, same great service with a better location to serve you. Call Wheeler Technologies for voice, data, and security needs at 664-TECH. That's 664-8324. And remember, depend on Wheeler Technologies for the current time and temperature every day at 476-1111. Tennessee Alarm Contractor C1750.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little, or you can borrow big. Lending Frog is a new financial gig. It's hip to hop into cash. LendingFrog.com is making a splash. Dig it, dig it. Dig it, dig it.
Coach to Coach is sponsored by two great Cleveland, Tennessee institutions. Check Into Cash, founded in 1993, the pioneer of payday advances, and Hardwick Clothes, founded in 1880. Visit checkintocash.com to explore our micro-lending products, including installment and title loans. Hardwick.com, America's oldest tailored clothing maker, offers made-in-America quality suits and blazers. Visit us online and support two Tennessee legends.
Oh, Uptown Hound, I wanna go when you're out of town. I bet you never thought you'd hear me howl.
Listen to your
I bet
dogs
if
and
you
take
don't
them to
take me
Uptown
there,
Hound
I'll
when you're
growl.
headed out of town.
I wanna
Uptown
go
Hound,
to the
located at
Uptown
3506 Old
Hound
Free Will
while
Road,
you're living somewhere
478-0555,
out of
or find them
I will be
online at
pampered and run wild
myuptownhound.com.
and free. I know you need a break, but what about me? That's what I need. Friday. Come one, come all to the Cleveland Speedway. That's right. Race fans, are you ready for the thrill of down-home, high-speed, no-hold-back racing? Get ready for the all-new Cleveland Speedway. This Friday, racing comes back to Cleveland. It's time to get your dirt on. An all-new track, an all-new grandstand, and an all-new racing experience. The Cleveland Speedway this Friday. Bring the entire family. Gates open at 6:30. Racing starts at 7:30. If you love dirt track racing, get ready for the all-new Cleveland Speedway. This Friday, racing returns to Cleveland Speedway. Don't miss it. See you this Friday at the Cleveland Speedway. Friday.
You just keep thinking, Butch. That's what you...
There goes my only possession. There goes my everything. I hear footsteps slowly walking as they gently walk across a lonely floor, and the voice is softly saying, darling, this will be goodbye forevermore. There goes my reason for living. There goes the one of my dreams. There goes my only possession. There goes my everything. As my memory turns back the pages, I can see the happy years we had before, and now the love that kept this old heart beating has been shattered by the closing of a door. There goes my reason for living. There goes the one of my dreams. There goes my only possession. There goes my everything. There goes my reason for living. There goes the one of my dreams. There goes my only possession. Fade away.
Old soldiers never die, never die, never die. Old soldiers never die. They just
Okay, we're back. We have with us for this segment Dr. Karen Mundy, and she's a professor of sociology and epidemiology at Lee University. And Doctor, if you'll step up to the mic there,
Okay,
and I'll let you introduce yourself and.
Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to this field.
Okay, I'm a medical sociologist, and I got my PhD from UT Knoxville. And then I did my dissertation in hospital research, a comparative study of hospitals. And that included, by the way, Bradley at that time and Erlanger. And then I knew that I wanted to go on, and so I got some grants, and I went on to Hopkins. And that's where I landed in epidemiology. And so I started doing continuing education at Johns Hopkins, and got a sabbatical there. And then I got another one later and went to Duke.
And you want to tell us what epidemiology is?
Epidemiology is the study of actually large illnesses, large-scale illnesses. And it comes from the word epidemics. When a series of plagues struck Europe, I think during one period, 1/3 of the population died from the plagues coming through Europe. And it was founded about 1850 in London by doctors, medical doctors, and they were concerned about not only plagues, but the cholera epidemic in London.
But that was Doctors John
Snow
and Percival Potts.
Percival Potts, correct, yeah. And they're interesting fellows. Both were medical doctors in London. John Snow looked at cholera, and at that time, around the 1850s, they didn't really have microscopes, and people didn't believe that minute organisms could cause illness. They were still basing it on other ideas. But John Snow was able to find the cause of cholera just through logic, through tracking things back in time.
And that was that. Actually, wasn't that because of the lack of sanitary conditions in homes? And
they didn't have good sanitation in the cities, and they just had the sewage run in the streets and then run into the rivers. So the transmission of cholera is the fecal oral route. And by the way, cholera was found also in Haiti. The UN peacekeepers from one country brought cholera to Haiti. So it's still around. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it's an infectious disease. It's bacterial. It was before antibiotics. And because of John Snow, they started cleaning up London.
Now, was that after they discovered that you couldn't, because there for I don't know how long, but doctors used to do autopsies.
Yes.
And then they would go to the birthing rooms and deliver babies, and they had a large mortality rate of the births and the birth mother.
Yeah, the guy that started questioning the practice of going to autopsies and then delivering babies was an Austrian physician named Semmelweis. And he was practicing, I think, in Vienna. He was practicing in Vienna, and he noticed that the babies that were delivered by midwives, the mothers had fewer illnesses, and the residents who delivered the babies, they had a much higher mortality rate for the women. But the residents, the doctors in training, would go to an autopsy first, and then they would come back and check the patients, and they would carry the illness.
And they didn't wash their hands.
They didn't wash their hands. So
actually, it was the poor women who had midwives at home who were actually better off.
Yeah, you've done your research.
Than the rich women who went to the hospital.
Right.
So.
But it took decades for people to accept his theory that that the disease could be carried by the doctors to the women, and that it could be invisible.
Mm-hmm. So, and as it turns out, just by washing their hands
with a lime solution, I think he used lime,
and that took care of a lot of that. And of course, they didn't go immediately from the morgue to the to the.
He stopped the practice, and so in that one hospital, it became known in Europe that was a good place to go to have babies. But it took several years for that to become widely practiced, and even today, hospital illnesses, acquired illnesses, are often because people don't wash their hands.
So.
Even today,
and that's like been 200 years since.
And we know today. Yeah, we know today. You shouldn't do that.
Wasn't at one time I read somewhere that actually doctors didn't even clean their gowns because the more blood that they had on them, that was like a badge that they had done more surgeries and therefore they were the most experienced. I heard that they didn't even clean their the clothes, the gowns and stuff that they wore because they thought that having that on there was somehow like a badge of honor. It gave you some credibility.
Gave you status.
Yes, exactly.
So can you kind of work us up towards today?
Okay. Well, let me tell you about the other guy who was one of the founders because it's a different approach in epidemiology. Percival Pott was around the same time of John Snow. And he noticed that young boys were dying from scrotal cancer, and they were too young to die. So he couldn't figure out why these kids were dying. They were dying in their late teens and early 20s. So he did a background trace, and he found that what they had in common is they worked in chimney sweeps. You would get slender boys and put them down chimneys, and they would be exposed to all the tar.
Right.
And the carcinogens. He didn't even know the language of carcinogens at that time, but he knew that was the one thing they had in common. So he was able to get London to clean up that industry. And they created, similar to what we have in medicine today, when you go into a danger zone, you put on new clothes. And then when you come out, you go to a decontamination room. So these boys would put on different clothes to do the chimneys, and then they drop them and not even take the clothes home.
So that kind of leads us into the two types of epidemics that we have today, and one being infectious and the other one being
chronic.
Chronic. And
correct.
So cholera and disease would be infectious, and well, you hear a lot about mesothelioma and I guess just our lifestyle in general with obesity and cholesterol. Those are all chronic.
Correct, and
diabetes.
In the West, in the developed world, most people pass away from chronic illnesses. But since the 1980s, there's been a resurgence of infectious illness, beginning with HIV. I guess, which would be the most noteworthy. But then there's been several other infectious illnesses.
And, yeah, I know. And today we're dealing with, I guess, the two that I've heard most about lately, of course, is Ebola, and the other one being enterovirus. Am I saying that right?
I think it's foodborne. I'd have to look.
Well, that affects the children. Yeah, it's the respiratory disease that they've had in children. But I think everybody's concerned about Ebola now that it's finally arrived in the United States. I don't know what's created more hoopla, the Beatles when they came or Ebola when it arrived in Dallas, but it had to be just a matter of time before it came here, didn't it? Or
yeah, but you could have delayed. Every week is precious. You could have prevented it, not completely. Biostatistics, people who specialize in biostatistics have these timelines. And they look at the reproduction rate of an illness. And if you can slow the illness down and if you can slow transportation down, you can't completely prevent it, but it gives you time to develop a vaccine, time to produce medications.
So, you're the ACE, the American
College of Epidemiology. Yeah.
Now, do they? What's their position on whether you should have travel restrictions from the African countries?
I don't think they have a position. Most of the people in ACE are institutional epidemiologists, and they're employed by the federal government.
Oh.
Okay. That's one of the things I found out. You know, my training has been in academics, and my paycheck comes from Lee.
So what?
And grants. So I have not that type of employment. But one of the things that puzzled me when I went to the D.C. conference was that they did not deal with infectious illness, and they did not deal with the standard protocols. They didn't mention the standard protocols for infectious illness. So one of the directors of the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, was there, and the CDC and those groups. But in fact, what they focused on was the value of electronic records.
Oh.
And they did not deal with the topic at all. No.
Well, apparently that's a big.
And that was in September. That was about the middle of September.
Apparently that's a big concern, because that's part of that electronic records is getting the blame for allowing was it Mr. Duncan to go home after he showed up at the hospital in Dallas, but.
Well, here's kind of a little kind of quirky thing. Tom Frieden, who is head of the FDA, not FDA, the CDC, he was at New York, and he was Public Health Commissioner in New York, and he helped emphasize electronic records. In epidemiology, the value of electronic records is big data, mega data, and this is going to help us track all sorts of problems. I don't think we really want the big data for Ebola. By that I mean we don't want a lot of numbers. We don't want a high reproduction rate in that for the U.S. or for anyone.
Yeah. So, but it seems to me that if you limited transportation, that it would. I don't see why they don't just quarantine Dallas.
Is that right? I've heard that tourism is going down in Dallas.
I'll bet it is.
But I don't think we should, in the blame game, if we're going to play it, I don't think we should blame Dallas or the hospital, because everywhere that Mr. Duncan went, he went into a major center. He went from Monrovia to Brussels to Dulles. Mm-hmm. And then from Dulles to Dallas, and take community hospitals. Community hospitals would have great difficulty being prepared for something like this.
Oh, I can imagine. Because I know Skyridge is in the Cleveland City Fire Department, at least they work together on hazardous spills and things like that, but so I think that's probably how they would have to treat it, as a hazardous material and work at it from that direction. I don't know. I'm just speaking off the top of my head, but
I think what the CDC is going to do is have regional centers, and if they think that you may have been exposed to Ebola, they'll send you to the regional center.
Mm-hmm. But why not? Why not at least? I was kidding a while ago about quarantine in Dallas, but the nurses, the 70 or so nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers you would think that they'd want to keep an eye on them for 21 days.
Yeah, the standard, this is the textbook model, is that when you think that there's an infectious illness, you do contact tracing. And then if they're first level, primary level, you put people in isolation for whatever time limit there is. And then if they get sick, you quarantine them.
Mm-hmm.
And we have done the contact tracing, but we haven't done the isolation very well.
Yeah. So I think whenever the president and Dr. Friedman and whenever they speak, they say that we can control this, and I have no doubt that we can. I'm just not sure that they are as well as they could. I mean, and I'm not worried about the Ebola virus right now because it's still just 2 people, but I don't want to take any chances, you know.
Well, let me ask you this. What would be the possibility that virus could actually mutate and change its structure so that what would be effective maybe in the first month, in the second month that it, because I know viruses can mutate. I don't know if that's just a clinical situation or what. Would you think that it would be probable that virus could mutate and therefore what would be effective treatment one month might not be an effective treatment the next month?
Well, I would be very careful on answering this because I'm not a virologist.
Okay.
I'm not trained in that specialty area. Right now, people in that field indicate it's unlikely. HIV did mutate. There's HIV 1, HIV 2. The more endemic illnesses, this is one of the worries of the CDC. The more prevalent an illness is and the longer it lasts, the more likely it is to start changing. And there have been already some changes in Ebola. There's different subtypes of Ebola. I looked at a journal just recently, and the 21-day period is based on earlier outbreaks of Ebola.
So that may have changed.
So, is it changing now? Is it becoming more lethal? I think the World Health Organization, in their latest research, they found a 70% mortality rate.
Mm-hmm. That's what I heard yesterday. Yeah.
But I would have to see in what areas that was and what type of Ebola.
Under what conditions those.
Yeah. So how long have we known of this or named this specific virus? Do you know that?
1976 was the first outbreak. Mm-hmm. And they're fairly sure it's from the reservoir of bats. So I wouldn't go around bats too much if you were in Africa. Well,
I'm pretty safe there. I have no intention of going to Africa.
Stay around bats. Don't hang out with people who eat bat food.
That's almost 40 years. You were talking about data sets earlier. It seems to me that there would be some substantive data sets to look at for patterns or
there is research on it, but just handling blood, just doing the research on it puts you at risk. And the early outbreaks were in isolated areas, very remote areas near rainforests. And remember that in these regions of West Africa, there was civil war. There's a lot of population unrest. So for people to even go in there, there's a great story. There's so many great detective stories in epidemiology. The researcher who first discovered Ebola, he was working in his lab in Europe. It may have been in Belgium, actually. And he got the vials through the mail. A nun had passed away from an unknown disease, and they sent the vials in ice, and one of the vials was cracked. It was the nun's blood. One of the vials was cracked, and the other one was intact. And he just used normal lab procedures. But he could have died,
Wow.
Sure.
Well, he's recently been giving interviews on BBC and talking about the history, but he named it after the Ebola River. He didn't want to stigmatize the village.
Yeah.
And the river's kind of nearby.
Wow.
Is there what's your level of concern about this?
On a scale of 1 to 10?
However you want to
was the scale
define
going to be?
Sure, 1 to 10. 10 being the worst and everybody needs to run, and 1 being not going to happen.
I would guess I'd be midpoint 5.
Yep.
I think it's a mistake to underestimate something, because then people stop believing. That it's better just to be honest and say there's a lot we don't know about it, and we're going to have to regulate transportation, and we're going to have to enforce isolation, and there's such a precarious balance between human rights and the community, the well-being of the community, and that's what the government's struggling with, how to make sure that people have freedom and individual rights, but also to protect communities.
And don't you think that it is hard?
That's tough.
I'm sorry. Don't you think it is hard to develop protocols when you lack information? Don't you need protocols to guide the process, or are there just general things that hospitals
this is not a
doing?
JV illness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's one of the reasons there hasn't been a lot of study done on it. You can blame the West and say, well, the West just didn't want to invest the money in the study, and the West didn't care. But I think a big factor is it is a lethal illness, and it takes a certain kind of person to go into this environment and be willing. For example, when our troops come, I'm glad our troops are helping out. On the other hand, when our troops come back, they probably need to go through a period of isolation.
Absolutely.
Unless we are absolutely convinced that there's no contact.
And the other thing is, blaming the West is not fair, because not only from what your perspective there, but also from the aspect that you're not only dealing with something that's lethal that you don't really know what it is, but now you have civil war. So you probably have more to fear from the warring situation. So now you're trying to set up an investigative situation, and you got to not only watch the virus, but you got to watch the local people and who's going to shoot you. And that would be a difficult situation to be in from both sides of that. I think that my personal opinion is that we should stop all travel, from that area of the world, because you know what, we don't know enough about it not to do that. I think And
well, if we needed, we certainly need people going in to help that
Sure.
region. But you could have chartered flights.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't want to ever stop that, but what we need is the commercial flights to stop, and if the government won't do it, what I would like to see is the airlines step in and say, hey, you know what, we're not doing that. We're not.
Actually, the airlines have. I fly Delta,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been to D.C. twice in the last month, and I've been kind of keeping track. What is my airline doing?
Right.
And I think the last part of August, Delta stopped flying to West Africa.
And I think Air France and one of the British airlines also had
They were
done that.
early.
Yeah, they were earlier
They
than
were
that, yeah.
earlier than Delta. And even United, when Mr. Duncan flew on United from Brussels to Dallas, I don't think United was required to notify people, but United went ahead and listed the flight. And you think of the position the airlines are in terms of litigation.
Liability is huge. Sure. Yep. I think sometimes the private sector is much better at doing those sort of things than the government. There's a lot less bureaucracy, and they actually have more risk, because from a liability standpoint, and the government, what are your repercussions against them? Virtually nothing. But if a private company does something that could be considered, not in the best interest or putting other people at risk, you know, they could incur a lot more litigation than you could against the government. I mean, so I think sometimes the private sector, well, I think most of the time the private sector is much better at doing that than the government is.
But, well, you mentioned something a while ago about not underestimating, and I'm not sure, you know, the government the federal government has went to great lengths to try to lessen the worries about the possibility of an epidemic in the United States. Now, were they, but when there's one and then two, you know, how many does it take to get infected before you start losing that trust value?
Yeah. I think that's the dilemma, that they either underestimated it in the beginning or they weren't frank, because the literature told a different story, you know. So when this started in March, you know, I started reviewing the literature, and many of us did in science, and it was telling a more frightening story, and yet we were often being given platitudes, and I think that is unfortunate. You don't want to cause a panic, but you don't want to underestimate it. You just need, again, to hit the middle.
Right.
But Mr. Davis, I wanted to mention to you the transmission pattern.
Oh, please.
Ebola is a zoonotics illness, and it comes from the word zoonotic, which means it's spread by animals, animal transmission. And in a lot of infectious illness, an infectious illness begins, not always, because cholera is fecal oral, but a lot of infectious illnesses, emerging illnesses, begin animal to animal, animal to human, human to human. And you see this in flu viruses. Now remember that cholera is bacterial, and now flu, Ebola, HIV, they're viral, so antibiotics don't work against them. But in many of these emerging illnesses, they begin in an animal reservoir, and these are wild animals, and of course you hear about the bush meat, both with HIV and with Ebola. People are exposed to bush meat, or people allow animals to run through their houses, or they don't have them. They're not healthy animals, and they have contact with them. And so you make this kind of scary transmission. No longer is it confined to animal populations, the illness, but it jumps to the human. And in this first level, the humans are the ones who care for the animals. For instance, someone who cares for poultry, or someone who cares for pigs, you know, a porcine virus. And then it's the next step is the people who take care of the animals bring the virus to other people. And that's where epidemiologists really become worried. Actually, they're worried from the beginning. Is a virus in the animal strain? For example, is Ebola for bats that are exposed to the Ebola virus, do they pass it on to other wild animals, like monkeys? And there's some evidence that occurs, but then at what point does it break out of the animal chain into the human and then to humans? And you see in the flu is not nearly as lethal. And I would remind you to get your flu vaccine.
I got it.
Oh, good. It's animal to animal and animal to human. And then the flu virus just travels around the world. And then around the autumn time, we start having cases of it.
And
it almost always comes from Asia. The H1N1 came from Mexico, but it's almost always it comes from being exposed to animals and cultural practices, and then it travels around, hitchhikes, on airplanes to us.
So before we lose the flu, I've gotten a request to ask you who should get vaccinated and when should we do this?
Well, I'm
for
going
the flu?
to try to get vaccinated as soon as I can. My husband's already been vaccinated. If you're allergic to any component in the flu, for example, eggs, if you're allergic to it, you shouldn't get it. If you're already sick, if you have a cold already and you're running a fever, or if you have immune suppression, say you're on chemotherapy, you shouldn't get it. But
you should not get it.
You should not get it if you have an allergy to any component, or you're already sick, or you have immune suppression. But for the rest of us, when we get the flu, we protect everyone. We protect not only ourselves, but anyone around us who may not have gotten it. We're protecting them from whatever we could carry, and it's called herd immunity.
I like it. And how long does the vaccine last?
Well, it depends. In older people, they're asking for 2 vaccines for a follow-up, in early fall and then later spring. And I guess they're assuming that older people might not have the same immunity. But usually it lasts during flu season, and one of the cool things about getting the flu, if you can call it cool, is that there's often cross immunity. So when you get the flu vaccine this year, when something else comes up, you may have some immunity for something similar.
Now, I haven't heard much about this strain of flu that we're having this year, or we don't. It hadn't actually broke out this year, has it?
No, I don't think so.
But what strain are we looking at this year?
I don't know. I've been so focused on catastrophes. I'm going away to Gatlinburg and forget about it actually this weekend.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, take a break from this.
Right.
But well, I don't know if we've distracted you with questions or not, but it's about time for us to wrap up. So I was just wondering, is there anything that you need to add that we didn't get around to, or?
Well, maybe something I brought up in the beginning, the reproduction rate.
Uh-huh.
If you're exposed to measles, the reproduction rate is about 1 person to 8 to 10 people, so it's very high.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not normally deadly, although there are some serious things. So please have your children get the vaccines, for measles and diphtheria and the other things. The reproduction rate actually for measles is 1 person to every 12 to 18 contacts. The reproduction rate for Ebola is 1 person to 1.5 to 2 contacts. So it's actually low compared to chickenpox and measles, but it's such a severe illness that's very high, and that's going to keep it going, the epidemic going, since more people are going to get it. If we can get it down to 1 to 0.7, less than 1, then we're moving toward controlling it.
So,
and that's the goal, I think, to get it down below 1.
So, do you think, are they working on a vaccine for?
Yes.
Are they?
Yes. They are working and doing their best for treatments and for vaccines. So that's why time's important.
Yeah.
Just to hold it back before we have a treatment.
Is it in the near future, or is it still far off?
I don't know
that. Okay.
I've been doing the people tracking, the demography of it.
But well, did you have anything?
No, that's fascinating.
But yeah, what are a couple?
Are we going to take a question, or it's too late? I guess
nobody called.
Okay, all right, okay.
What about what are some of the famous outbreaks that we've had in the United States historically? You mentioned typhoid,
yellow fever in Memphis. Mosquito-borne outbreaks. We had yellow fever in Memphis, and then when the Panama Canal was being built, and in Memphis they had to clean up the swamps and go through mosquito eradication, and we still have some mosquito-borne illnesses. So every once in a while they tell you, get rid of your water, your standing water.
Uh-huh.
And also transmission of illnesses by raccoons, rabies, is still around. So we have to be careful about that. There is a rabies vaccine, but you don't want to.
Don't want to take it.
Yeah,
Do you?
you don't. You don't want to be put in that position.
Yeah. So anyway,
those fall under the zoonotic as
Yeah,
well, are
zoonotic.
they? Even for the insects.
And you still have transmission of illnesses by mice. And for instance, the plague actually
Sure.
came by mice. Probably best. I hope Ben's not listening to this, my husband, because we've been having an invasion of mice since the weather.
It's getting cool.
Since the weather turned cold.
Right.
But actually, mice still carry lots of bad things, and so do bugs, certain types of bugs.
But going way back in history, this is just something that I read that I always thought was, and it's a social practice, or it used to be, but women always walked next to the building, and the men walked next to the street. And that turned into a mannerly practice. But in the very beginning, it wasn't like that. From what I've read, that the housekeeper or the woman would throw the dishwater out onto the sidewalk, and when she did that, it would land on the woman instead of the man.
So the woman walked on the curb, getting the dishwasher.
She walked on the inside, and she got the bulk of the of the dishwater.
If you notice in Europe, in those old houses, those narrow streets with the stacked houses, the very top houses are out. They're out toward the street. And that's because people would dump their dishwasher, their whatever.
Dishwater?
Yeah. We don't want to, investigate exactly what they put out their window. But you wanted the higher level apartment. You wouldn't smell the street. And then you could throw out your refuse from the top window.
Yeah. Well, you want to end on that?
No, I don't know how to end it. I'll let you end it.
Okay. Well, we've been talking to Dr. Karen Mundy. She's a sociology professor at Lee University, and we've just been talking about diseases in general and the Ebola virus. And looks like we do have a phone call. Good morning. You're live on Whoop.
Hi, this is Sharon, your local Google specialist. We have a front page position.
We don't want to listen to that.
Like yours, and can guarantee.
If we have a few minutes, we might want to mention something that's in this area that epidemiologists are concerned about.
Okay.
There's a high incidence of stroke in East Tennessee and northern Georgia, right in this regional area. And Erlanger is one of the main stroke centers in the nation, so they get a lot of people who've had strokes. And epidemiologists really don't know why. What is it in the population that creates higher risk for stroke in this area? Is there a genetics link, or is it diet or lifestyle? So that's one of the puzzling things, and there are many different kinds of strokes, but this would be something to do research on for East Tennessee.
Okay.
And it would be a chronic illness, more likely, because I think 75% of strokes, they're not hemorrhage strokes, so they're more likely to be of a chronic nature. What is it about this area that overrepresents us in that particular illness? Because it is a serious illness.
That's when we need the detective work for the patterns.
Yeah,
right?
we need detectives.
Yes.
Do you have
health detectives?
Yes.
Do you have a favorite health detective?
Not right now. I'll think about it and bring you a note. Who my favorite one is? Maybe the Belgium guy who discovered Ebola.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe him.
Well, we're gonna we're gonna put a stop to this. But I appreciate you coming by, Dr. Mundy, and talking to us, and hopefully we've gotten some information out that people need to know.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
David, who do we have next week?
Oh. Who do we have next week?
Where's my calendar?
I have to look. I think.
Thank you for coming. You're welcome anytime. Oh, we have Dr. Mary Hedrick.
Oh, Dr. Mary Hedrick.
First.
Yeah.
And she is running for the U.S. House of Representatives against Chuck Fleischman in the 3rd District, Tennessee 3rd District.
Yeah.
And then we have Randy Wood after that. Tell us about Randy. History professor.
Oh, yeah.
That Randy.
Well, every year we have the Halloween's coming up, and every year he gets his students out and they go to Fort Hill Cemetery and they do the tour. And so that's who Dr. Randy Wood is.
I actually went to that last year,
Oh, did
David,
you?
and I would recommend it. It's actually, if you are just the least bit interested in history, or if you enjoy ancestry, if you like to research your ancestry, I know you like that too, David, as do I. You will love the tour at Fort Hill Cemetery. They have actors that recreate, and they're in period costume, and they speak in period speak, and they tell the history of some of the folks from Bradley County.
Oh, wow. That does sound interesting.
Yes.
All right.
We will see you next week on Listen In.
Okay, well, bye-bye.
Bye, Dave.
In the great green state of Vermont, and this woman came to me between our sets and said, you played a tune there in the middle of the show. Is it a real tune or is it something you made up?
Speaking and singing, I'd like to start with the young man over there on the 5-string banjo. He comes from over around High Point, North Carolina. That's